Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us in our Museum Dialogues, Cooperation and Connections to Society. As part of the celebrations of the 203 years anniversary of the Museu Nacional National Museum, the Goethe-Institut, in partnership with Museu Nacional and with institutions from Germany and South America, promotes this virtual event, Museums in Dialogue, Cooperation and Connections to Society. The Goethe-Institut activated its network in South America and Germany to invite museums professionals for a collaborative long-term exchange with the Museu Nacional. The German Foreign Office has been an important partner in this endeavor. As a collaboration between the Museu Nacional and various museums and institutions in Germany, a series of workshops like this one was launched in 2020. The partner institutions are working as Brazilian-German tandems to develop concepts for forward-looking strategies on central topics such as building and maintaining collections, archiving, digitization, museum accessibility, and education concept. This event is being broadcast in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. So I invite our co-host to this event, Alexander Kellner, Director of the Museu Nacional.
So very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Well, apparently this is how things are being done these days in a very interesting fashion, because we really are living in very interesting times. I would like to start thanking all of you for being here with us. As you know, we are a couple of days away for the celebration of the 203rd anniversary of the Museo Nacional.
Recording in progress.
Which, by the way, is not only the first museum to be established in the country, but actually the first scientific institution of Brazil. And yes, we had a very hard time in September 2nd in 2018, when the main building of our institution was devastated by a big fire. However, due to the work of several of the museum employees, and for all, and I cannot stress this enough, and for all the several partners we are now in the process of reconstruction. And among those partners is the German government and the Goethe-Institut, who is making it possible for all of us to discuss issues that concern not only the National Museum, but actually all museums around the world. Because we have to face it, things have been changed. The world has been changed after this pandemic time. So I would like to thank all of you for being here today. I would like to thank the panelists. I would like to thank Dirk Augustin from the General Consulate of Germany in Rio. I would like to thank the Goethe-Institut, and let's have a very good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you. Now I have the honor to invite the General Consul of Germany in Rio de Janeiro, Dirk Augustin. Welcome, Mr. Augustin. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Rio and South America, and good afternoon to Germany. Thank you very much, Marilia and Alexander, for your kind introductory remarks. As you said, my name is Dirk Augustin. I'm the General Consul of Germany here in Rio de Janeiro. And I also would like to thank all the organizers of this event, the Museo Nacional, the Goethe-Institut, all those who were involved in setting up this stock-taking event. And thanks, obviously, for giving me briefly the floor. The incident that set off the level of museum dialogues that we already have today between Brazil and South America and Germany was, of course, triggered by the devastating fire of September 2018, when innumerable cultural treasures were lost. But the disaster also galvanized an unprecedented amount of international solidarity and cooperation. The German Foreign Office was happy to provide aid to the amount of 1 million euros, most of it from very practical rescue and restoration work. The Goethe-Institut and various museums, foundations, and universities in Germany then joined forces in working with the Museo Nacional on forging a more long-standing cooperation, which would also focus on questions of modern museology, and which was to culminate in a large conference here in Rio this year. Once again, obviously, we will have to wait for the pandemic to abate and come together in person. But as I hear, the digital workshops that have been held so far have been a great success, and there are more coming up. And today we have the chance to reflect on broader issues of the lessons to be learned from the pandemic. You know, like, is the world really going to be the same again once we're all vaccinated? Probably not. I think a certain sense of vulnerability will remain for us for a very long time to come. And societies will have to adapt to the new realities. Museums will have to do so too. And in some aspects, the museums may even lead the way. They may address other issues. They may address other audiences or audiences differently. They may reach out to broader segments of society. I hope that today's event and the discussions between the specialists on Monday will come up with further questions and maybe even some first answers. So I wish everybody exciting discussions and many new insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dirk. And now I'll present the agenda. So our program today will be divided into two parts. We will now have the presentation of Michael Faber and Amanda Cavalcanti that I'll present to you soon. And then we will have a short break and then a plenary between 5 specialists, 5 speakers talking about social participation and sustainability. And we invite you to post questions in our chat because we're going to invite our speakers to answer and discuss and debate the questions of the audience. So now I invite Amanda Cavalcanti from Museo Nacional and Michael Faber from AVICOM that will present us how the use of technologies and social media can promote inclusion and reduce barriers. Amanda is museologist from the museologist section of the National Museum. Currently is one of the coordinators of the creative process of the institution's future long-term exhibitions. Since 2020, Amanda Cavalcanti has been a doctoral student in the postgraduate program in Museology and Heritage, Unirio MAST, holds a master's degree in art history and theory from the School of Fine Arts at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and has a bachelor degree in museology at the Federal University of the State of Rio de Janeiro, Unirio. Dr. Michael Faber is a cultural anthropologist, vice director of the LVR Open Air Museum, State Museum of Rhenish Folklore Common, near Cologne, and he's retired since 2019. His main experiences are curating exhibition, media productions, event management, museum education, staff training, marketing, and public relations. Was from 1991 to 1996, and from 2016 and 2019, vice president, and since 2019, president of AVICOM, that's one of the ICOM committees in his living in Bonn. So welcome and thank you. And I'll invite you to present this great contribution to us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, dear Maria, for this nice introduction. I think Amanda, my friend Amanda, will start with our presentation.
We have prepared a short presentation, so the organization of the events may put it so everyone can see. First, I'd like to greet Marilia Bonas, Dr. Alexander Kellner, Dr. Dirk Augustin, the Goethe-Institut, the organization of this event, and everyone that is watching us. Thank you so much for joining the celebration of the National Museum 203rd anniversary. I am very honored to work as a museologist at the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro, a natural history and anthropological museum, which is the oldest Brazilian museological institution. And next slide, please. We are currently facing the challenge of rebuilding our institution. And I work on the development of our new long-term exhibitions that I hope you all visit in the next years when it reopens. One thing I always talk about is how it touched me to see the commotion of the public after the fire that devastated the museum on 2018. Demonstrations of affection, messages of support on social media, children sending letters and drawings to our team. This only gave us the certainty that we should return this space of exhibitions and activities to our audience and maintain a connection with them at this time when our institution is reinventing itself. Of course, has been very challenging to deal with a reconstruction of this size. It is a gigantic project, but it is the public that motivate us. For this reason, thinking about inclusion and accessibility in this project, it's not an option, but it's fundamental, because the National Museum that we are rebuilding is for you, our audience. And by our audience, we mean all society with no segregation. That's why we understand inclusion and accessibility as principles to be followed.
Yeah, well, dear colleagues, first I want to thank Fernando Galvao from the Goethe-Institut for realizing this important meeting, and in general the Goethe-Institut for supporting the National Museum with different come-together events under the motto, Inclusion of the Cultures of Brazil for National Museum of Future. A whole series of collaborations between the National Museum and institutions and specialist colleagues will take place in the coming period, which will culminate in a conference in the summer of next year. The International Museum Committee, AVICOM, also participates in this cooperation, and I'm very grateful to the Goethe-Institut in Rio de Janeiro for the support of this cooperation, but also to the museum itself, in this case, Amanda, who is commissioned by museum for organizing the cooperation with AVICOM, and she does it very, very perfect, as I can see. Thank you, Amanda.
Gracias,
The next slide, please.
La diapositiva, por favor.
From the last PowerPoint. Okay, and then, okay, thank you. Now, what is AVICOM? AVICOM is one of the international committees of the International Council of Museums, also of ICOM, and that's very important. ICOM is an UNESCO organization.
Es una organización
alone. ICOM, its national and international committees and its members have to act according to the guidelines and conventions of United Nations. AVICOM is the expert committee for audiovisual, new media, and communication technologies and social media in connection with museum use. Next slide, please. AVICOM observes and analyzes developments in these fields, promotes professional exchange of experiences and measures in these fields, and advises also museums in these fields. A central question for AVICOM is how to use of audiovisual and communicative means for efficient and sustainable communication with the public and for the inclusion of the public and all their groups in the design of the museum. Next slide, please. On the other hand, we see corresponding efforts by the National Museum in Rio. This is what it says in the document jointly signed by the National Museum and AVICOM. The reconstruction of the museum offers great opportunities to make the Museo Nacional a pioneering museum institution in Latin America in terms of concept, content, methodology, and didactics, to a museum that focuses on integration and inclusion of all social and cultural groups of the Brazilian population. It is an essential part of the reconstruction process as well as of the future museum work to engage all these groups in cooperation with the museum.
Next slide, please. Well, as Dr. Michael Faber just said, this partnership was born from a larger collaboration which has its goal a future-oriented exchange between the National Museum and different museums and experts that will result in the International Museum Conference next year. So in the run-up to the conference, workshops between the National Museum and other relevant institutions are being prepared to discuss the key topics of the conference and promote interinstitutional alliances. And in this context, the partnership with AVICOM emerged, in which our mutual concern about inclusion and accessibility and AVICOM's great experience in thinking about the use of new technologies and social media guided the organization of the workshop that we are preparing together.
Sorry, we need the next slide. No? Okay.
So the workshop is going to happen online on August with a duration of 3 sessions of 3 hours. And we will have some very important expert presentations about the use of technologies and social networks to reduce barriers. But also we will have a moment when we are going to invite different individuals to talk about their experiences and expectations about inclusion and accessibility in museums through the use of social media and also new technologies. The goal is to invite individuals from different social groups in Brazil and with different disabilities so we can think about communications strategies that actually consider their demands. Also, we want to call people who can then be involved in some way with the reconstruction process. I mean, that is not a one-off speech at the event, but that we can keep building this dialogue afterwards to conceive a truly accessible museum. The theme of the workshop has a lot to do with the perspectives we have for our museum, because the reconstruction offers opportunities to make the National Museum a pioneering museum, a museum that, with its new conception, focuses on inclusion of all groups of the Brazilian population. So both for the development of the exhibition contents in a truly representative way and for obtaining new collections, it is an essential part of the project to engage social groups of national relevance like indigenous communities and Afro-Brazilian communities. Still with regard to inclusion, the National Museum understands that accessibility is a fundamental principle of its entire reconstruction project. It means that not only architecture, but also the exhibition contents, its resources, devices, and the training of the museum staff are going to be developed in order to reduce the barriers of the museum relation with the audience.
Sorry, Amanda, sorry, we have a lack of slides. There were some slides more for your...
Oh, yeah, the next one now, please.
Yes, and another one. Next one. No, okay, no, that was it. Okay, sorry.
The previous one, I think, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay. And at the same time, we know that new technologies and social media are important tools that are available to us. And then more than just being used for entertainment, there are also great opportunities to promote the accessibility and the integration between museum and its audience that we wish so much. And in this moment of pandemic and social isolation, this need for museums to take on new online spaces was highlighted worldwide. But actually, in the National Museum case, since our main public spaces were closed due to the fire that happened in 2018, we already had to start using the social media and other online strategies to maintain this contact with the audience, being a very relevant part of our current communication. So we are very excited about all the ideas and the shared knowledge this workshop may provide us.
Okay, thank you. We came to the next part. Yeah, how to use digital, audiovisual, and social media for the process of inclusion. The Tango workshop. There are some topics. How helpful can the media be in this process as a future inclusive cooperation? What possibilities exist and what methods and formats are available and useful when using such media for inclusion? That will be the main topics of the 3-day tandem workshop. But now I would like to introduce present some principles for the workshop. Next slide, please. The next slide, please. Yeah. I would like to formulate some principles that should shape this workshop in order to contribute to the sustainability of the museum. In general, that's the first point. As I said, the work of the museum must comply with the conventions and declarations of the United Nations. The second point, inclusion refers to all groups of the population without exception. Third, inclusion means communication and cooperation with all these groups on an equal footing and on the basis of mutual respect. Fourth, this communication and cooperation has to begin with the new conception of the museum. That means a collection, an exhibition, an educational program, and also with the conception of public relations. Point 5, next slide, please. Inclusive participation is required for the museum profile definition, the research, collection, and documentation of cultural, social, and historical heritage, up to the developments in recent culture. The development of the conception, technology, design, methodology, and didactics of exhibitions, and generally when upgrading the museum infrastructure. Next slide, please. Some aspects more of the workshop. I would like to formulate them. Aspects on the basis of these principles. The use of social media and of websites for the permanent information of the public about the progress of the reconstruction of the museum, its collections, and of its exhibition creations. Then communication with people with special needs, with special physical needs, via special mobile applications. The use of video conferencing with target groups. The importance of the cell phone for communication and working together with people who do not have any other communication technology equipment like computer, landline, and so on. And also with people in indigenous habitats or favela people. The use of technologies in the museum's exhibition that are accessible for all people. Next slide. Okay, then we both, Amanda and me, we have to thank you very much for your audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amanda and Michael. And I invite our audience to send questions, but I have someone, of course. And so I would like to listen about what do you think that are new challenges after the pandemic, in the post-pandemic. So now we're dealing with the no touching things. And every time we're talking about technological like devices, we have this touching thing and we don't know properly what's going to happen with this kind of technology. So we're going to translate to other things. And in a way, and especially to Dr. Michael, I think in Brazil, we have the main challenge of maintenance of technological device. So we find money to develop new exhibitions, but to maintenance is the main thing. So, and to update content also, it's expensive. So sometimes you have like a huge projection and a video mapping, and then it's like, it's not updated anymore, and you don't have money to develop another content or to put in the software. And so what do you think that is a key issue to guarantee like a really accessible and interesting and stimulating exhibition with different levels of accessibility, also using technology, but also thinking about sustainability in context that culture is not necessarily the main object of budget to maintenance. So what do you think in our experience, how can we develop real interesting exhibition and like using technology, but also thinking about sustainability and maintenance?
We have the same problem in Germany too. The culture is not the most important for the state or for the local government budget. We have some problems during the pandemic times now, of course, in our museums, not so big problems like maybe in Latin America. I think the challenge, it's not the question of what is the challenge after the end of the pandemic, sondern the challenge has begun now. It is now you have to start with your communication work. It's not so necessary in the second step to produce media for exhibitions. By my opinion, it is more important to use media for the permanent communication with the public for information about that, what you are doing now and what you want to do in the next time and in the future. And these media are not so expensive. You can use the website, of course. It is expensive to employ somebody to host the website, of course. You can use social media, and you should do it permanently. That's very, very important. All the other aspects, how to use audiovisual for museum education, for illustrating exhibition aspects or something like that. That's not the question of this time. Of course, we have to think about it. We have to prepare this. Of course, it is depending on the budget. Yeah, I think in this time and in the next time, it will be most important to inform permanently on that what you are doing and how do you want to include people of your country. Maybe a little bit against the official meaning of the government. Sorry that I have to say it. Was it an answer to your question?
Yes, perfect. And I think it's really interesting that we have this big change recently in the perspective of developing of temporary and long-term exhibition, that the main understanding of curators as like also mediators of the audience experiences. So now it's key to understand inclusion as one of the main issues to exhibitions. So I think it's really exciting to know that these are the basis of the new long-term exhibition in the Museu Nacional. And of course, as an ICOM member and an ICOM Brazil director, it's really exciting to understand that AVICOM is now also exploring and engaging with these issues that yes, in I don't know, we know that we can be really fetishist about exhibitions, and then now we're really thinking about social inclusion in different perspectives. And so I'll just, there's another question from Luis Costa to Amanda specifically. Amanda, what is the biggest challenge in the inclusion of different social groups in the National Museum's reconstruction?
Oh wow, it's a big challenge to include.
You have the floor. You have 10 minutes to answer it.
It's such a big challenge to include these groups. As I said in the presentation, it's something we think is fundamental in this reconstruction project. When we say about designing new exhibitions, but also in the creation of new activities, forming collections, in these media strategies that we're going to develop in these new moments of the institution, especially when we think about those groups that will be presented in the exhibition itself, for example. That is the part in which I work. And it's a challenge, talking about a little about the exhibition process. It is a challenge because the method that was traditionally applied in museums is that in which the specialists are those who are legitimated to occupy the space and speak for these people. So now we have to establish a whole new methodology of action without delegitimizing the specialists, but adding to them the legitimate voice of these individuals themselves. And for this, we need different planning, other type of financial resources, new strategies of collection of objects, and being able to establish this partnership, a trusting relationship with these individuals. So it's like, it's a whole new methodology of work that has a lot of steps and that has to be built day by day in their institution. So I am very happy to have this opportunity with AVICOM to share some experiences of other experts and also invite some individuals from these strategic social groups to have a conversation with us in one of the days of the workshop and start this partnership that I hope endures for many, many years.
I want to add something. For me, as far as seen, this tandem workshop will be the first maybe all over the world, that let participate from the beginning a lot of different target groups. People with handicap, with special needs, blind people, and so on, representatives from the indigenous populations, representatives from the favela population. I've never heard before that something like this has happened in a museum. And congratulations to you, Amanda, and to Brazil to make this real.
It's really touching and it's really exciting. And I think that the main, and Amanda was sharing with us the commotion, the great grief that we had as Brazilians in general, not just Brazilian professionals of museums, about the National Museum. And now as like we invite people, really, so if you like us, if you like museums, if you want to, that this not happen again, so join us in this construction. And then I think it's really the most exciting case that we're going to have in Brazil, because there are so many levels, the collection is so huge and so many specialists. And so engage specialists in this kind of, like, to share authority is really a tough challenge. Because even if we have an university museum and research, so we have specialists usually are like the owners of the truth, of scientific truth. And then when we present them that museums are more than the place of specialization, but also the place of connection with different levels of knowledge. And you you offer a structure, an exhibition structure that could be hacked, updated, and with discussions and different understandings of this knowledge, and with all these voices, and it's really powerful to us in Brazil, and it's really exciting to know more about this. There are some questions about how educational staff are involved in these decisions and the listening of those focus groups, and also how to motivate. And this is I'll share the questions, and then we can discuss about how to motivate governments to invest in educational cultural projects, even through the remote digital system, since they can also generate a production change economically. So how can we also present this investment in museums also in an investment in the economical perspective? So the first question is about educational and the staff, how they're engaged, how they're involved in these decisions. And the second one is more about advocacy and how can we convince people that what we do, it's also important in an economical perspective.
So I'll answer the question about the educational staff and how it is included in our reconstruction project. And we have in the museums a lot of different groups that have that is composed from different staff, from people from different staff. For example, we have a group in which we are preparing the contents of the new exhibition. So where we discuss what are the key topics, the key concepts you want to communicate with the audience, how is the narrative or these long-term exhibitions that we are creating, and what are we trying to communicate and to achieve, what we are trying to achieve. And so in this group, we have people from the educational staff of the museum that participates. We have a working group on accessibility. That is a group with different people from different staffs. And so from museology, I am one of the people that works in this working group. There are people from educational staff and so on, people from different backgrounds, but that share this interest in accessibility. That is a group, for example, that is more close related to the preparation of this workshop together with AVICOM. I am the one organizing the workshop with Michael, but I always share the decisions and ideas with this working group. And there are people from the educational staff as well. We have a working group on public audience studies. There is also a working group that is preparing how can we collect these expectations for the new museum, this new age or museum from the general public, and also to understand which are these different strategical groups we want to hear. So also there is people from the educational staff in this group. So we are really collaborating in a lot of integrated groups that has people from the museology sector, the educational sector, and also from departments of research. And it has been very interesting to collaborate in a multidisciplinary staff in all these groups.
Thank you. And about convince government, what do you think about it?
I want to hear what Michael has to say about it. It's a very challenging.
A lot of pressure, Michael. A lot of pressure.
I'm not so close to the Brazilian government. I think you have to postulate what the museum has to be in the future. You have to formulate your principles, your work, depending on the principles, to post them in your website. Oh, it's maybe a little bit dangerous, but to post it in the social media and to inform about this again and again. And after time by time, people will more and more identify themselves with your ideas, with your philosophy. And maybe then time will come that the government cannot retire itself and has to follow the public meaning, the public opinion about the museum and your opinion. So you are responsible to catch the government by catching, in the first step, the people. Yeah, it's easy to say something like that. In Germany, the situation is a little bit another. But for example, if you are showing also, and that would be my proposal for your museum as a living museum in the future, show also the culture development in recent time, not only history of culture, cultural history. If we do it in my museum, you know, it was an open-air museum. We are showing old farmsteads from the past 500, 600 years, but we are also showing, for example, a pub of the 1970s. We are showing a discotheque from 1960 in our museum. Yeah, we are going to recent time in documentation and presentation. And that is very important for our visitors, because these visitors, maybe they are so old like me, they can identify themselves with this expositions, with this heritage of the last 30 years developments. So that would interesting. How, for example, not only collecting old traditional things, objects of indigenous people. No, let them say by call, yeah, using the cell phone. Let's say tell you how are they living and what would they want to give to the museum as important objects, for example, of their recent life situations. It must not be artificial. It must not be expensive or extraordinary. Maybe a T-shirt that they are wearing now, yeah, or something like that.
Perfect, wonderful. I think we have some questions that we will share with you because we have to change to the other part. But thank you very much. It's really exciting to more than moderate, to participate in a way in this so beautiful project and this strategy that is so connected with what we need to do now, right now, with our museum. So thank you very much. Thank you, Michael, for really inspiring words. And Amanda, thank you. You can count on us also in this challenge. And thank you. So we'll have now a 5 minutes break, pause, to spread your legs, to take a break, to have a glass of water, and we'll meet again in 5 minutes. So thank you very much. And then we're going to change the next panel after this 5 minutes break. Thank you.
Aurelia, thank you.
Stretch your legs. So, welcome back. The world has changed radically over the past year, and the imperative of social participation in museums is central to discussions in our field. Whether in the discussion of the new definition of museums or in the challenges that cultural institutions present themselves in the post-pandemic period, social participation today occupies a new and challenging space. To debate this issue, we invite 5 experts to this panel. I will invite each one of the speakers to present themselves in 2 minutes, like really quick, and then we will debate a guiding question. So I invite, first of all, Cristiana Cerejo, that is the Vice Director of the Museu Nacional, to present herself.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Marilia. I'm the Deputy Director of Museu Nacional. I'm also head of the collections of the museum. I'm originally a biologist and work with crustaceans, systematic and evolution of crustaceans. So I also teach and guide students, PhD students and master's degree students in the zoology course in the museum. And now I'm part of this big team to the reconstruction of the museum. And it's a pleasure to be here with you and discuss this important theme, which is the museum and the society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cristiana. Really glad to see you here. So I invite now Emiliano Valdez, bienvenido, welcome, to present himself.
Gracias, Marilia. Thank you, everybody, who organized this undoubtedly necessary discussion, and everybody who's also joining the meeting today. I'm Emiliano Valdez. I'm Chief Curator at the Medellin Museum of Modern Art. I would say a sort of medium-sized museum in Medellin, which is Colombia's second largest city. I was originally trained as an architect with later studies in the history of art and literature, but I think that initial learning and formation around architecture and the city has really driven my curatorial practice and my thinking around museums as places that really are actors and sort of public spaces within the city. I am currently enrolled in a master's program in urban and environmental processes, which, despite not being directly connected with museum practice, I think continue sort of to nurture this idea of where the museum fits within that increasingly growing form of association between humans, which are cities, and the absolutely transcendental space, I think, that we can play in that fabric. So very excited to be here today and to hear also my colleagues from other museums. Thank you.
Thank you, Emiliano. We are really huge fans of Colombian activities during the pandemic of museums. So the reaction of Colombian museums really inspired us in Brazil. And so thank you for being here also. I invite now Inês de Castro, please.
Yes, good afternoon or good morning to you all. Thank you so much to invite me to discuss this very interesting topic. My name is Inés de Castro. I am the director of the Linden Museum in Stuttgart in southern Germany. The Linden Museum is a state museum of anthropology of the state of Baden-Württemberg. So we don't have so many national museums here, but we have state museums with our federalistic German system. And this museum was funded during the colonial times, so with the idea of collecting everything outside Europe. Yeah? So this is a little different idea, as my colleague Nanette, that will follow ethnographic museums here in Europe, collect objects from outside the world. So we have a quite a good collection on the Americas, on Africa, on the Oriental, on Asia and Oceania. So far. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Inés. And now I invite Nanette Snup to present herself also.
Yeah, hello. I'm Dutch. I come from the Netherlands, and I studied historical anthropology in Paris with a focus on Central Africa. There I worked for 16 years at the National Museum, the Quai Branly Museum in Paris. After that, I was in Eastern Germany, where I headed 3 ethnographic institutions, and now since January 2019, I'm in Cologne, and also, as Ines pointed out, the same kind of structure of collection and museum also from the very first, the beginning of the 20th century, mostly collected in a colonial context. So at the moment, we are trying to open widely our doors, and we are dealing a lot, as many other museums, with restitution and the decolonization actually of our institutions, of our structures, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have this one guiding question that is almost like a PhD thesis to answer, but we'll have like 5 minutes, and then we will have also questions of our audience to discuss. So the main question is, how can social participation and enhancement of constructive solidarity strategies like co-creation, collaboration, cooperation, dialogue, and one can put a lot of terms here, how can social participation contribute to the sustainability of museums? And I think that we can approach sustainability in a really open perspective, not economical sustainability, but also social sustainability. And I don't know. So how can you think, what do you think about this? And I don't know which one of you want to begin. Cristiana, if you want to start.
Okay, I'll try to resume. It's a quite wide, theme. For sure, I think this is a really huge paradigm nowadays for us, because Museu Nacional also is a colonial museum. So we've been there for 200 years, and of course, our start was a top-down collection manner, as other museums that we know. And this is new for us, how to construct this understanding and connection with the society is very important. And as Amanda said in the panel, it's a new methodology, and we are trying to build up this in a museum. And of course, because of the huge fire, the 2018 fire, we have this opportunity to rebuild our collections. So we are trying to understand how to do this. So for that, it's important, because museums are crucial cultural institutions, and we need to catch the society. We need to involve them. And of course, to involve them, we need to do the question, what do you guys want us to show? What's the cultural interface nowadays that's important to show in the museum? So this is a good question. For instance, we have the questionnaires in our festivals asking people what they want us to show in the new museum. So it's quite interesting to hear what people wanted to see. Other thing it's going on now, the ethnological sector in our museum are in straight dialogue with the indigenous people. And they were already interested in rebuild the collections. So Professor João Pacheco, which is the researcher, bring up the local indigenous, and they are qualifying and bringing objects that they want to show in our museum. And it's a kind of a partnership building up new collections. And this is already happening. So it's not just a project, but it's already happening. And of course, with that, people are feel represented, and they are much more, I think, connected and engaged to be. And in the other hand, as the other question Marilia talked is how to get financial. Of course, if you feel represented and the society, go for it, I think it's easier for us to get more money. So it's a two-way, venue, and of course we understand, but it's hard to say how can you do it, because I think it's not easy. I don't think it's easy, but I think it's possible, and I know Germany is doing something like that. And of course, with the fire, we have this opportunity to kind of have a bit of lack of space for us to kind of understand and discuss with the society. And I think we are doing that for sure. I think that's it.
Thank you, Cristiana. I don't know who wants to go next. We can go the order of the presentation. I don't know if Emiliano wants to share with us. What do you think about it?
Absolutely. So I think, I'd like to maybe just start very briefly with something that, with which you started in turn, Marilia, which is the fact that times have changed. And times have changed dramatically, and I think maybe in a way that it's really unavoidable for the first time. I think I'd like to think that museums have strived and made an effort over the years to keep themselves as current institutions, and some have undoubtedly, but I think now it's a call for all of us to really do it in an active and in a constant manner. And that leads us to the question of what and for whom are museums, and I don't think museums today are the same that they were, 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or even maybe 10 years ago. And definitely they're not for the same people. I think we're in a situation in which increasingly we have to realize once and for all that museums really should be for everyone. And this also takes me back to the previous presentations. And then just briefly talk about this idea of sustainability versus purpose. No, I completely agree with Cristiana in that in as much as we can fulfill our missions and understand what we are as institutions, it's going to be a lot easier to work on these ideas of sustainability. So what are the strategies for social participation and constructive solidarity? I think there's a long way to go in that respect, and we still don't have a very clear path. I mean, I think that's something that we're going to have to figure out and construct, but that construction is necessarily going to have to be hand in hand with the people that are part of the museum today. What I think it necessarily involves is an attention to constituencies and audiences, and understanding the complexities of those audiences, complexities that are increasingly more complex and more varied, no? And we're going to have to be ever more flexible to really try to engage in dialogues with all of this wider variety of publics. A key word there, I think, it's obviously dialogue, is being open, and is being with our ears and our eyes and maybe all of our senses, really sort of like wide open to hear what people, not necessarily what people want. I mean, I don't know if, I will advocate for a museum that asks people exactly what they want, but definitely to the state of society and how people are behaving and what their needs are in terms of social development. And finally, this idea of strategic collaboration, which I think is one of the points that maybe have been for longer on the table, no? This idea that if we work together, if we share projects, if we do collaborations, essentially it's going to be further reaching, but also less expensive, no? Because we're going to be able to share the costs. So in the case of MAM, we depart from a few characteristics, a few points that I think are absolutely essential for us. One is the fact that we are an art museum, a modern art museum, any modern art museum that was founded relatively late in 1978. So we are more inclined towards the contemporary. And we always think in terms of art production, because I think that's sort of like the blood that goes through our brains, and that's really what gives us life. And we try to not deviate from that very much, even though we aspire to transdisciplinarity. It was founded by a group of artists. So then again, you know, our relationship to the founding community and to the arts community in Medellin and Colombia, and I would argue in Latin America and the world in general, is also essential. We also think from a very localized point of departure, which has to do with the reality of Medellin and Colombia today, but also in the recent past. No? A recent past that you all know was problematic and that really kept large swaths of the population from accessing culture and education because it was really co-opted by violence and by other forms of oppression. So we really strive to make a point in that way of understanding the social tissue. And finally, Latin America as a sort of first neighborhood, a place where, you know, where we have cousins and brothers and siblings with which we feel that we share common interests. I would then say, maybe to start wrapping up, because I think my time is over, that we strive to focus on, as I said, youth and locality as a way of enhancing our purpose and our mission, because by enhancing that purpose and mission, we feel that it's, and here again, I stress what Christiana mentioned, our easiest path towards sustainability, not only in financial terms, but really as an institution that can continue to be active today and in the coming future. Thank you.
Thank you, Emiliano. Inés, if you want to share with us.
I forgot totally my presentation to say that I was born in Argentina. I don't know if this is good to say for Brazilians, but...
No, it's good, it's good. Like Latin America is a should be a great country with two languages. But it's, yes, we love Argentina also.
Well, talking about the Linden Museum, we are very interested in finding new ways of museum work based on multivocality and multi-perspective. I think with this we want really to overcome this singular Western perspective that predominated in our past, coming from the colonial times. And we are convinced that participation and working together with groups is essential. And we have both two sorts of groups that we target, I would say. One is representatives of the so-called source communities, the communities where our objects come from. And the other are the diverse local neighborhoods of the museum. So there are a lot of examples. We have been working on this for so many years. For example, when we reopened our permanent exhibition on the African collections, we did this with an advisory board of Stuttgarters with origin from the African continent. And this board was fully involved for 3 years of preparation of this exhibition in the development of the concept from the beginning. And they had also their subjective stories, and they became visible as authors of the texts of the exhibition. So this was important for us. Currently, we are also working on the so-called Linden Labs. These are like co-creation workshops, different forms of exhibiting and collaboration that we do for different collections. Another example would be, for example, co-creation of exhibitions, as the upcoming exhibition of Love and War, Tamil histories from India and the diaspora, for example, that will come next year, is co-curated with Mr. Mutu that works in Chennai in the Folk Museum of Southern India. So, and additionally, we have diverse actors from India, diaspora here in Germany, and also from Chennai that we involve into the exhibition concept. And in general, we regularly invite different scholars and experts from different parts of the world to come to Stuttgart in the so-called residencies. We encourage them to jointly work with us on our collections and to research topics that are of interest for them. So we don't put the topic, but we ask people, would you like to work with us, and what is your interest? And I think that this form of dialogue is very crucial for us to establish relationships, and it also helps us for sure to get a deeper knowledge about the objects and about the collections, because in colonial times they only gathered the objects without the information that was really behind those objects. So these are really forms of participation that we work a lot with as I resume. One are really the so-called representatives of source communities from the countries where the objects are from, but also from the diverse neighborhood of Germany, because we are convinced that with this participation, the museum will get or will strengthen its social relevance. And we are also convinced that we will make perhaps or gain a more empathic understanding of each other, as well perhaps also of a better understanding of our own diverse society, because Germany has become, we must say perhaps like that, a very diverse society as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ines. Thank you very much. Nanette.
Well, a lot has been said already, so I will try to be short. Of course, this is totally fundamental that there is social participation and inclusion and collaborative praxis. I think we are all agree, and I think also that museums were actually more places of conversation, and step by step we are changing them in places of conversation, and so they become bit by bit polyphonic spaces. And as also Ines said, but also Emiliano, the idea also of multi-perspectivity and multivocality. So I think it's a worldwide movement that museums know that they have to change in order to survive, and we have to open and to break the doors and to become really inclusive. Museums are hegemonic spaces. They are mostly racist, they are sexist, they are classist, they are heteronormative institutions. So we can say now if they remain like this, well, they will be obsolete. So we are in a moment of the Titanic, I have the feeling. And so, but the Titanic, we could also consider it as something very constructive. And we are all obliged to rethink our institutions. So I think a lot has been said, but for example, here in Cologne, but also before in my own praxis, we use a lot of we integrate actually autonomous spaces inside our permanent collection, but also in temporary exhibitions, in order to really to lose control and to give really power and empowerment to diasporic communities or to activists. It's not that easy to build and to have this autonomous space. And I think that museums have been open also for conflicts. And to let it in and to discuss this. That's why also we try to rethink the idea of museum education, and that's why we're working also with a lot of live speakers, also mostly from diasporic communities or who have this emotional link also with our collections, because I also think as museums become more and more places of conversation, it is also about let in emotionality, and that emotions also have a space in museums. So that's why also we work a lot with young people. So now we are building a committee of teenagers who will discuss with us the program, but who really have an impact on our programming and in our way of thinking, because that's how, what does this mean, collaborative praxis? Do you really have this impact on an institution? That's why I say we try to break open the doors a little bit with a lot of energy. So we also have urban dancers in our ethnographic museum, and to try to find for example, a link between our historical collections and urban dance. So you can have this kind of very interesting experiments who enable to unlearn and to rethink the museum of the 21st century.
Wonderful. And I think that we're every time we're talking about multivocality, but we want to avoid conflict. We want to have the authority in the main narrative also. So it's really challenging to deal with this. And I think that's the best part of this. It's the most challenging, but it's the most powerful way to engage communities, to embrace the difference, really, like giving space to conflict also. So we have a lot of complex questions also, but the first one is more to share the cases. So Herman Schneider, would you please explain in more detail what kind of digital formats the museum, each one of the museums, is working with? How do you adapt the programs to the current developments in this digital field? So Herman, invite us to share a little bit of this digital experience.
Continue on the same way?
Well, yeah, we can.
Okay. Well, digital, it's also a big thing, especially now with the pandemic time. We've been digitalizing our collections since the 80s, I would say, and we've been trying to build up systems. Of course, we have natural history in our area and the anthropology. So we are quite a big museum in Museu Nacional, and things have been running kind of independently until we started with this directory of collection that we started just at the time of the fire, and we are running now something more institutional, and we are doing, yeah, we are doing fine. Because of the pandemic time and the fire, things are quite up and down. But it's very important to digitalize and to communicate and to expose our data to the society. And of course, doing that, we need patterns. And especially in the biodiversity area, the zoology and botany, we are quite ahead in having these patterns. We got big open data platforms like the Global Facility Biodiversity Internet, which is the largest database in the world. It's more than 1 billion database there. And this is a quite powerful way of putting your data in, because we are speaking worldwide. And of course, it's important to the museum to build up this worldwide, database. And we needed to understand how this pattern, and this begins because internationally there is a pressure to the museums and scientific institutions to put that data inside of those things. And we got money to build up our database in these standards. So in biodiversity area, we are quite doing well. On the other hand, the anthropology, especially inside the museum, we are trying to build up more these patterns, as I said. So we are in a way of infrastructure. We are infrastructure, but we are quite, how to say, we are trying to build up this pattern to be in the same way we got in the biodiversity, field, because without that, it's quite difficult to interact the databases and the data with other museums. So it's very important to put, the collections and also the information in a wide sense. We just approved a large project to kind of do the meta database. So we wanted to do not only images and the data as collectors, but also songs, tissues, DNA tissues, and we wanted to interact all this data so we can, management the data and of course put it out for the society and for the museum. So we're quite aware of this, task, which is a huge task, and we are in the way of doing that to do a excellent management and put this out for the society and for our colleagues. It's just hard to speak in such a short time. Sorry.
Yeah, but we're doing great.
Yeah, it's really a huge, a subject, and I've been involved for that since 2014, mainly with the biodiversity area as is my field, and now ahead of the museum, we are trying to build up for the areas, and it's quite a big task, but it's essential. I know in some countries they can even get financial support if you don't have this standard in a clear way. So we are running to build up a really strong base for us to move on with our collection, of course, other areas of the museum. So digital is essential, of course.
Emiliano?
So I think in our case, because we are an art museum, the central question has been how to understand the digital channels, so the virtual world, I suppose, not as a means through which we only communicate, but also as a space in which we can create. I think that's been the largest challenge, but also our sort of really guiding question, because we didn't, I think like most, all institutions, when the pandemic started, we all very quickly shifted to the digital and started putting everything that was physical in the virtual space. Some things worked, and a lot of things didn't. And I think we were lucky enough to realize that quickly and put a hold and sort of step back for a little moment and ask, does it really make sense to try to shove everything that we're trying in the physical world again into the virtual? We obviously did 360 degrees virtual models of our exhibitions. And I think that's probably something that is going to stay around for a while, and it's a way of accessing an exhibition, but it's not a replacement for the exhibition. And well, I think strategies like that are unavoidable. You know, it's something that we have to do. But for us, really the question then turned into, how can we understand that space enough so that we can provide an infrastructure, which is a little bit what we would do in the physical world, for artists to create and for audiences to access those creations. There are basic or elementary examples of that that I think everybody can relate to, such as having a virtual exhibition room where you'll include only works that are sort of virtual friendly, meaning images, virtual reality, video, moving image, film, of course, things like that. But try to go a little bit beyond that, because the virtual world is not made only of the support, it's also made of the relationships that the virtual world generates. And those relationships are very different to the relationships that you would have in the physical world, because it would involve, you know, bringing people together in a way that it's different from bringing people together in the virtual world. So, you know, there are examples, and I wouldn't want to go too much into that, but I think one of our, I don't really want to use the most successful programs, but you know, one of our programs that I felt were most rich in terms of that thinking was a series of performatic conferences or performatic lectures. So something that's very close to what we're doing here, which is we're transmitting ideas and thoughts and ways of thinking, but that would also profit from the possibilities of this space. And that involves being in different parts of the world at the same time, including contents of different sorts, and really trying to blend all of those possibilities together. Now, I won't say that the results were perfect, but I think they were a really interesting experiment into how can we think about these spaces in a way that is not thinking about it from the physical world. And I think that remains one of the challenges. I think we'll continue to develop new tools for that, but I think that will only be possible in as much as we continue to remind ourselves that we're dealing with a different quality of space, and that different quality of space really requires us a different approach.
Thank you, Emiliano. Ines?
Well, as my colleague said, we experimented also with a lot of digital strategies due to the pandemic. We moved talks or discussion panels or guided tours into the digital world. Some of them worked and some not. But I must say this digital strategies is something that is extremely important for the joint workshop that we're doing with the Museo Nacional, with the educational department, and where we found an incredible expertise of digital matters, especially with Andrea Costa and Frida Marti. And I'm really looking forward to learn from you and from the colleagues from the Museo Nacional. So this is something that is on our list.
Thank you. Nanette?
I think I do not have very much to add. We are working. I think it's very important that our collection will be available on the internet as soon as possible. Of course, with Corona, it was actually, we were a little bit in panic because our digital life was not like that, particularly in museum education or mediation, and so we experienced a lot. But I think it's very good because you find new ways, and it's actually when you are thinking in the digital world, it gives also new perspectives on the physical museum. And what is crucial for the so-called ethnographic museums is that you can have very easily conferences with people from over the world, and that's crucial. And I think that will remain in in our future. And that's a good way.
Thank you. We have another questions, many other questions. One of them is from David Alfredo. It's to Nanette. And so museums created in colonial times that collected artifacts are the subject of current debates. How does the Linden Museum position itself in relation to the claims of countries that had their objects usurped? And how is this dialogue with the musealization proposals of these countries? And also, I think that we can provoke, I don't know, in a way, this discussion of the colonization in a wide perspective to other museums. So we have the social participation and decolonization issues now are the main things. So it's just.
Well, of course, the link between ethnographic museums and colonial history, they are together. So for us, actually also in North American museums, but here I speak for the German museums, we are all dealing with it. And I think this is a global movement. But what we are doing, so of course, we try to be as transparent as possible and to communicate those difficult and violent, very often violent biographies of the objects. But I think where there is a paradigm shift is that when we speak about the biography of things of the 90s or the beginnings of 2000, where we thought, okay, when we mediate the biography of an object, this is the way how we have to do. And I think now there is more an idea also of action. We speak a lot about restitution or recirculation. We speak also about the idea of ownership. Who is the owner? Could we reinvent the idea of shared ownership, or we are just the object will be just on loan in our museum? So the statues of object, that's very interesting. So at the moment we have a huge exhibition about 500 years of anti-colonial resistance. So instead to speak from the perspective of the colonizer, we try to speak about 500 years of anti-colonial resistance in the global south from the perspective of the colonized through autonomous spaces, activist curators from the global south, and so on. And I think this is very important, really to turn the perspective, and it is also a way to not just to speak about the colonial history, but yeah, what was that? Those 500 years, and what does it mean, resistance? What does it mean writing your own history? What does it mean, but also what does it mean colonial trauma and the coloniality, the impact of colonial trauma in our today's society, but also the idea of resilience. And I think that is very important to give also empowerment to societies who have been colonized. So it is really the idea to make marginalized voices louder and hearable, and that's why I like very much this idea of colonial aphasia, and this is what we try to give place for those marginalized voices through this exhibition. For example, this is one of the examples about anti-colonial resistance in the global south.
Great. I don't know if Cristiano wants to share anything, or Inés also.
No, sorry.
Go ahead, Inés, go ahead.
Well, as an ethnographic museum, we have, I think, we share the same, I wouldn't say problems, but the same points, yeah, with Nanette and with the Museum of Cologne. We are very open towards restitution. We think that this is one important part of a new partnership with the Global South, and but only one part. So I don't feel that restitution can solve everything and would never heal the atrocities that had been committed during the colonial times. But I think it's very important to give the partner a feeling of trust and respect to each other, and so we always like to combine. It's not a prerequisite, but we are happy to combine it with dialogue and with the network and with collaborative projects, so that we also want to tell the story here. We still want to tell the story about this entangled history, this very difficult history of the colonial times, and we don't want to erase this history from our museum. So we still try to incorporate, but with the voices from outside, as Nanette said, from the colonized voices.
I just want to add something. Of course, is also a today paradigm, this decolonization, you know, and you're going to start to think about not just the colonizer and who has been colonized. So it's a matter of understanding the both points, and that's the beauty, because you just, you know, take out just one perspective and having other perspective. Especially in the biodiversity area, we've been trying to repatriate some information, not the object, which sometimes is really hard to get, the real object, but the information. So, for instance, in botany, as we got Essicatas, the Herbario, you know, a piece of collection. We've been doing a road, you know, digitalization of this material, and there is a lot of Brazilian material that have been abroad to Europe, and there is a road, you know, connection of repatriate this information, and is already in the virtual herbario, and within this big database you can have access of the flora that have been, you know, collected from the Europeans and taken abroad. And this was possible with a collaboration with the Brazil and also the institution Kew Garden, you know, Kew, for instance, Herbario. So Brazilians went to the herbarium, photographed and digitalized the information and made these available, which is great, because then you got the information in and you can understand what kind of information was having, you know, in the back 19th century. And of course, Brazil, you will understand what has in that time, and this have been used, you know, globally. So this word repatriation sometimes is quite a bit of a taboo, but it's important to understand the information at least, because I know to give back the proper, you know, individual, it's hard, but we can. And also ethnological sector here in museum are also doing the same thing with images digitally. So going abroad, seeing what we have from the indigenous people abroad, and trying to get this information a digital way. And of course, this makes it much easier for you to understand what was going on that time and put together the information. And of course, this is quite important to understand, you know, this kind of exchange, you know, material by that time. So this is just an example that is happening.
But Christiana, if I may continue, it is really also important for us to see the continuities, yeah, of the colonial times, not to just look at the former times of the history, but to see what is the result today in the societies, yeah, in the way we do economic or we do network, how we see the global south here from Europe, yeah, or the other way around, and to deal topics like racism or different really topics that still are there in our societies. And I think that is something that is a big challenge for the museums, but where they get a great chance, yeah, to be of social relevance.
Wonderful. We have many questions. I'll choose one last question to a quick answer from everyone. So Prasanna Kumba, he's asking, so there is always, we talk about participation with society, but no one talks about internal participation of different museums departments. And so press, public relations, museum education, visitor service, and how important is this process of internal participation for the future of museums, especially with regards to a real decolonization within the museum themselves. So the idea of hierarchy, and then that there's like sharing authority. We are always talking about this with different audiences and focus group, but how this is developed and how, what would you like to share about this experience in your museums?
I'm happy to start with that because I have a very concrete case to speak to, if I may. So during the pandemic, one of the I suppose silver linings was that extra time we had, and one of the things we did aside of this sort of restraining from the digital extravaganza and rethinking the quality of that virtual space was we did something that we internally called the future exercise, and it was an in-depth rethinking of the museum with all of the museum staff. This required, this was a complex, really, exercise, and I think a somewhat destabilizing for moments, and I think something that we had never really done, and that sort of brought up a lot of different ideas about the museum that we are today from the different members of the team that confirmed MAM. And I think it was personally, and I think also, I dare to say that for the museum, it's going to be one of the most enriching results of that time. That really, I think, came out of that concern, the person who was making the question of saying like, but do we really know what everyone inside the museum thinks the museum is, wants the museum to be, or thinks what a museum should be? And I think that has given a lot of light into the way, as many of us were saying, the way the museums have been run. They have been, despite, and especially in the case of our museums, we argue a lot for destabilizing an art as an element through which question the status quo and hierarchies and heteronormative behaviors and institutions, and it's very rarely that we actually apply those very same ideas to the museum. So I'm happy to say, I would say it's one of the things that make me proudest and really most excited about that period, that initial period of the lockdown, in which we really had the time, even if it was virtual, to think very horizontally and with people from all of the departments. I mean, everybody was involved there, maintenance staff, obviously customer care staff, obviously curatorial staff, etc., and say, what do you expect the museum to be? This doesn't necessarily mean that, roles and positions and decision-making in the museum is going to change around necessarily, but it means that we have a better idea of who we as a group of people running a museum think that museum should be.
Thank you, Emiliano. don't know if you want to share experience about internal decisions and groups.
I can speak a little bit about that. Actually, we had that experience that Emiliano just said, because we have that with the fire. When museum got the, fire was such a huge disaster, and all actually the walls break down. So people really needed to start to reconnect, to start to rebuild the museum, and also to start to got working spaces. So it was something basic. So it was quite interesting. Of course, disasters, as we say, this is really shocked, but then there is a kind of a resurrection of that situation where we needed to rebuild ourselves. And of course, things are different in a way. So there is nowadays much more interconnection. People are much more institutionalized. Some projects raised with people that were never, sitting down together. So it's really interesting how we can internally build up, the ideas and new projects. And we started on with the after the fire, and of course with the pandemic also it's a bit different, because of course we got people. There is more meetings. It's easier maybe to exchange some ideas somehow. It's easier, it's much easier for you to connect. But yeah, and of course we got connection with other museums. We received, for instance, the National History Museum from London. We received staff from them to try to cooperate with us after the fire, and that was quite interesting to understand what they are doing, and we kind of approximate with other, with other people in the same area. So it was quite interesting, and it's important because we are similar institutions, and we are speaking for the world. So, for instance, one of our missions is to disseminate science and go to new collections and disseminate this science. And the same with the Natural History Museum in London. And we are kind of needed to understand what we are doing. And of course, it's important to interchange, and we are, approximate. So it was interesting.
Thank you. I don't know if Inez and Annette want to share anything. We're short of time. No? So we had a lot of questions, but of course we are short on time. We'll share the questions and we'll put them in our material and to share with the specialists. But thank you very much for this inspiring panel. It's really great to discuss and to provoke this discussion also in our institutions. And so thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge. Thank you very much for joining us. So we're going to now, I'm going to invite again our co-host, Alexander Kellner, to talk a little bit about one of the main issues and the central issues of social participation, that is also the educational steps. So how can we debate this? How can we include? How can we count on this? So we have a question of Ulrich Fischer thinking about the function of education, the institutions of education in the digital transformation, and also Fernanda Castro, Flávia Requeijo, asking for what's happening inside. So if Kellner, if you want to share with us the role of the educators in this dialogue, cooperation, and connection, and in the development of the exhibitions also, and in the middle of the discussion that we had in Japan about the new definition, when the word, the concept education was excluded, and now we're debating again this new definition. So I give you the floor to talk about the importance of educational staff and all this discussion in the National Museum today.
Thank you very much, Marilia. How much time we have? An hour or two?
5 minutes.
I got you. But actually, to be honest with you, I think that these are some very good points that have been raised, and I would like to thank everyone who actually called our attention to them. I know it's going to sound a little bit cliche, but the fact of the matter is that this world is being changing, and the pandemic had speed that up. And it will continuously be changing. And that's one thing that scares us, because if you ask anyone, education is one of the main issues of any museum. But it's not all. We really have to change somehow our perception, how we pursue the dialogue between our institutions and the society. That's not only a fundamental issue, it's a question of survival. And we should not be discouraged by trying to pursue and to answer a line of questioning. And the line of questioning is something in that direction. Why do institutions like us matter? Why should the society spend resources in museums, in exhibitions, and education associated with exhibitions? From our side, what I can tell you, and to everyone that has raised a question, we are listening. And that's why the Museo Nacional has decided a couple of months ago to create a new adjunct directorship, which is called, can be translated something like Museum and Society Integration. And it's not only the museum's educator that need to take part of that. And by the way, I want to stress here, we are incredibly proud because we do have the oldest sessão de assistência ao ensino, kind of teaching assistant section that deals essentially with the public of the schools, so the students. So museum is very proud of having the oldest kind of arrangement of section in that respect. But in that new directorship, we also have included the museology section. We have included the kind of what we call the public service section, even the restoration and conservation lab, and also all the work, the programs that we are dealing. We have a section for that is called the University Extension Programs. So directly to answer the question, how do we see the role of specialist educators who research and work with the public? It's a crucial one, but it's not going to be enough. It is getting far too complicated. And here is something, a take-home message for everyone that's listening and for us itself. We need to learn how to work together. There's absolutely no point to make the recurrent mistake that only one group has the knowledge how to deal with the public. This was always a complex issue, and it's going to be even more complex during and after the pandemic times. The bottom line is we all do need to reinvent ourselves.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you very much. I think that with the open space is wonderful, the open dialogue, and we can construct better institutions with this. So thank you very much for hosting and for inspiring and this event also. So we are in the end of our meeting here. We would like to thank all present who actively participated in this discussion, to all our guests today, to all the partner institutions that are collaborating in bilateral partnerships with the National Museum, and to all the Goethe-Institut and National Museum team that has been working to activate this network of cooperation between Europe and South America for the reconstruction of the Museu Nacional. And we have a campaign and a cultural exhibition. So the Goethe-Institut, together with the National Museum, will run a campaign that will be activated through Instagram with the hashtag Meu Museu Nacional, with the question for the public: what is your dream for the National Museum? The public will be invited to submit their artwork through a form that will be launched on June 11, along with a call for submissions. The public is invited to say what are their experience and expectations for the future of the National Museum. The selected images will be part of a virtual and also physical exhibition in front of the reconstruction works of the National Museum. Visit the networks of the Goethe-Institut Rio de Janeiro and Museu Nacional to find out how to participate in this collaborative campaign. So follow these profiles, share what the museum is developing, discussing, and engage yourself in this discussion to make it more participative and powerful with multiple voices. And so it's really great to be here. And thank you, everyone. And we'll meet soon and follow the profiles to know more about what's happening inside the Museu Nacional and this partnership with Germany by Goethe-Institut. Thank you very much.